Hey guys, this is Joe with Unity Code Tutorials. Welcome back. This is now the fourth tutorial, and in this tutorial we're actually going to make some tanks come at us so we can shoot down some tanks. That sounds like fun, right? So the first thing you want to do is go to the asset store. I have it open in this tab right here, but if you don't have it open, go to Window and then come down to Asset Store. Open here. So all you want to do, take this out so I can show you what I did. You will want to get these models. Let's type in military vehicles and then hit the free only. Free is good. Come down here and you'll see stylized low poly military and so on from area 730. Okay, you're going to click on it and you'll see we have a good assortment of vehicles we can use in our game here. I have already downloaded them, so I only see import, but you'll see a download button, hit it. Once it's downloaded, hit this import button and things will be imported. Okay, moving on. Once you import them, you'll see some folders appear over here. Now really, I mean, there's more to this. What you download, it does more than what we're really going to use it for. All I want to do is use the prefabs in the area 730 folder. So this editor default resources folder, just go ahead and delete that. We don't really need it. I mean, it's causing problems, and the only reason that is because I haven't taken the time to dig into it because I'm not worried about it. I only want to use the models. So we go into the prefabs and we see these are the different things that we can choose from. Right now, we're going to start with a simple tank. I'm just going to drag the tank out here. It's way too big, I know. Or is it too big, or is the turret too small? Ooh, I don't know. Well, why don't we do this? Being that we're already dealing with the turret was here first, let's shrink this down. So let's hit the R key, scale, wait a minute, I have the turret selected. I want to select the tank. Right, so we're going to scale the tank down to a reasonable size. It's a tank, it should be fairly good sized, right? Now we want to bring this down to the same level. So really the easiest way to do this, just put it 0, 0, 0, which is where our turret is. If you haven't brought your turret to 0, 0, 0, just go ahead and bring them both to 0, 0, 0, then we can bring them out and see that they're both, I mean, they're not exactly on the same playing field, but at least they're close. And we're going to scale this up just a bit, and we'll make them on the same playing field. We don't really have a playing field. For now, why don't we just create a plane? Let's just go to create 3D object and create a, you know what, let's do a cube. We don't really need a plane because it's just going to be, a plane has more triangles in it. Cubes are very simple, and a cube doesn't have to stay a cube. Let's take this and name it playing field. Now in the scale here, let's just scale it up. Right, 10, is that big enough? No. How about 100? How about 1,000? Right? We don't need to go up in the Y, we're just going to do X and Z. 1,000. Okay? There's our playing field. Now in a future tutorial, I mean, this is about coding, so I don't need to get into how to texture this, but it would be cool if we textured it, I think. Just to make it look more cool. But right now, I mean, this is about coding. You want to learn about coding. There's plenty of great tutorials out there about how to texture and whatnot, because that stuff is all very important. It's just that I want to focus on the coding. So now let's get our playing field and see the heights of things, how high things need to be. Okay, is the tank on the ground yet? Now with our code, we're going to spawn many of these, but we're going to have a baseline of how high it needs to be. Okay, so that looks good. That looks good. So if we remember 4.08 on the Y, it doesn't matter where we put it. As long as it's that high, it's going to be okay. We're not going to have it climbing up mountains and all that. That's much more advanced. And we want to keep it simple. Simple is good. Simple is always good. Now if you want to make a game where the tanks climb up mountains, that's awesome. not going to discourage you from doing that. But for the sake of learning coding, let's keep it simple, you know. Now, I don't really like this being called turret 1A. Let's just call it, let's make it important, right? I'm going to do all caps. Turret. Because this is the turret. This is like what we need to maintain and protect and all that. This is the only turret on the map. Okay, so naming is important. At least I think so, to make sure. Well, I mean, you should think so too, because once you have a lot of objects, you're going to want to know what stuff is. So, you know what I mean? It's important. So this tank, we're going to make our own prefab out of it, right? This is the prefabs of the folder from where we downloaded it. But we're going to add stuff to the tank and make it our own. So let's take this and put it in our own prefabs folder. So now we have a tank. And it will also save the height of it, I believe. So if we were to delete this, right, and then bring this out. Okay, it does not save the height. Does not. Does not do that. Okay, good to know. So, that's okay, because we know what the height is. We're going to use this. We can actually just turn it off for now and keep it. So if I need to look and tell it where to spawn, how high it should spawn, then it's going to be okay. And it's just going to be okay. There's no need to panic about that. Now, enough rambling. We're going to get right to it. Next order of business, create a script that's going to spawn the tanks and make them come towards us. Okay, so we need to think about how we want to do this. Do we want them to be coming from all directions, like a traditional turret defense game, or do we want them to be coming all in one direction? I'm kind of leaning towards all in one direction, because we don't need to copy the traditional way to do it. We can make our own. In the future, we'll have multiple turrets. How about this? We're going to have multiple turrets. You're going to be able to choose which turret you control. There's going to be tanks coming all in one direction. Of course, maybe we'll add to that later on, but for right now, all in one direction. We'll have a base over here somewhere, which we're not going to worry about right now. But for right now, we're just going to have tanks spawning, coming in this direction. Okay? So, first thing we need to do is create a script that's going to handle this stuff for us. So let's just let's call this enemy manager. I'm not going to call it tank manager because we might have enemies in the future that aren't tanks. I mean, we do have more prefabs to use. Look in here, we do have more stuff we can use. For right now, we're just using tank. Okay. Enemy manager. Now, we want to spawn tanks. So first thing I should do is make a game object variable. Now, I'm not sure what the problem is. It's not like suggesting things to me and making my life easier like it normally does. So let's see what's going on. Let's go ahead and compile the script. Now, is it going to be okay? Okay, just take a minute to absorb this and remember what's going on here. We have our game object variable that we're going to be able to edit from the inspector. Now, we haven't actually created the game or the manager yet. This is the script, but we're going to have to attach it to something. Let's go ahead and create an empty game object and rename this enemy manager. Attach the script to it. And we're going to need our tank, so let's go ahead and throw our tank in there. Can't do anything yet, we haven't told it to do anything, but we're getting set. Control S will save the scene for us in case our computer explodes. Well, in that case we still can't get it, but we tried, right? Okay, so what we want, we have to think here. Before we start writing code, what do we want to do here? We're going to want tanks to start spawning. Let's just, how can we start this as simple as possible? Every so often, so we want a variable for how often is a tank going to spawn. Because an example, every 5 seconds a tank is going to spawn along that edge and come towards the turret. Every 5 seconds it's going to spawn along this edge somewhere and come this way. So that 5 seconds needs to be a variable. So let's say public float, because we might want it to be a decimal point. And let's go spawn frequency equals 5f. Now we're going to be able to change this, of course, from the inspector, but I'm going to set the value initially to go along with our example. So now we have how often it's going to spawn. Okay. Now we're also going to need, how are we going to spawn it along that edge? There's going to be a vector 3, because when we spawn it, it's going to have to be a position. Now, if you're at all confused, I'm going to go back to where we spawned our projectile, which is actually right here. See, we instantiated it and we give it a position, right? So in this point, in this example, we're actually using a transform variable, which we dragged in from the outside, right? If we go back to here where this script is attached, this fire point is right here. Now in this case, we have this whole edge. We could make a bunch of different spawn points and then select one, but we want to make it where it can come from anywhere on this edge, right? So we're not going to put a spawn point every single unit along this edge. So what we need to do is figure out what we need to randomize. We're going to do some randomization. So let's use our tank here. Just bring it back into focus. Bring it over here. Now as we go along this edge, I just want to see, because we're going to have to put in a manual position, right, of where we want it to spawn. So if we go along this edge, look over here. Notice right here as I move it. Oh, I messed that up. I need to just grab this blue one. Just go right along here. Now notice the z-axis over there, how it's changing and nothing else is. So this is the z-axis. Now how far out is this? I know it's 500 because we made this thing 1,000 by 1,000. So 500. Now we probably don't want to go all the way out to the exact edge. We might want to start in here. So why don't we say 415, z 415, and then z, how about negative 415, just make it simple. So somewhere between there and over here at positive 415. You know what I'm doing is I'm looking right here. Okay, let's go ahead and just kind of make that vanish for now because we're not worried about it. It's there for things like this so we can figure out where we want things to happen. So that's going to be our range. Now we could make that a variable. Why don't we make that a variable? But for this example, I'm just making it simple for the example. We're going to do public vector 3 and actually assign it that, 415 to negative 415, that range. So this is going to be spawn area. Okay? Spawn area. Now, hold on. How are we going to do this? Because there's two positions. There's two positions. How are we going to make a spawn area with a vector 3? Here's what we could do. Is we could make it either positive or negative, but then thinking in the future, that might make it complicated. Because I could just make it 415 on the z, and then whatever the x and the y would be. And then say, okay, well, you can either do it for positive or negative of that z value. I think we need to make it even simpler. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of this. So, and I'm letting you watch me think through this because that way you'll see my process of thinking about this and you'll develop your own process of how you think this through. So, what we're going to do is we already know that we want to have it along the same x-axis. As we do this, the x is the same and the y is the same. The only thing we're going to change is the z. That's the only thing we're going to change. So what I could do is I could just make values for the start and the end of the z. That's really, what I could do. Either that or I could make start and end values for everything. Because maybe in the future we want things to spawn even further back or even further forward or what have you. So why don't we go ahead and just say start Z, and then in the future, if we want to have a starting X or even a starting Y, if we have a helicopter or something, we can always add that. So let's go ahead and say public float start Z spawn area. And what did we say it was going to be? It's going to be 415, and it's a float, so we have to put the F. Now we're going to add the same thing, but it's going to be NZ. So we're just going to copy this, and we're going to say NZ spawn area, and this is negative, so we just put a negative sign in front of it. Okay. Now these are going to be used as we randomize this. So here's what we're going to do in our update method. Wait a minute, I'm in the wrong script. I am in the wrong script. Now we decided we're not going to use this, so here's what I'm going to do. If this ever happens to you, we're going to do Control X, which is going to cut these out of here. I'm going to save, Control S to save that, Control S. Now Control X cut it out, but it's copied to the clipboard, so if we go to our enemy manager, we can come back in here, do Control V, paste it in here. It's very important that we get this into the right script. So the enemy manager has these variables, and during its update method, throw this down here just because I like to. Here's what we want to do, is every time the clock hits a certain amount, right? Every time we get to this 5 seconds, we want to spawn one of these tanks. So we're going to add some more variables to do that. We're going to do some private variables, and this is because we don't need them in the inspector. We don't need them to be accessed by anything else. This is going to be private float spawn timer. So there's going to be the spawn timer and then the spawn frequency. The timer is what the actual clock is at right now. It's going to count down. And then once it gets to 0, it's going to spawn a tank, and then it's going to reset to the spawn frequency. So right when we start here, here's what we need to do, is we need to set our spawn timer. Being that it's private, I don't like capitalizing the privates. I kind of like to keep them. This is what I like to do. I like to have an underscore and then lowercase for privates, and then publics are capitalized. It just seems to make sense to kind of differentiate them in the code. So here's what we're going to do, is have our spawn timer be set equal to our spawn frequency. Now the reason I don't just set its value right here is because this is going to change in the inspector. When we do our testing, we're going to say, okay, let's see how it works if we try to spawn it every 3 seconds or every 1 second. Or maybe even as the game goes on, as you level up in the game is going to change it and say, okay, you're doing good, but what if we double the amount of tanks that are coming at you? Then we'll be able to just change this variable in the game. That's why I don't hard code the value right here. So we're going to set it equal to the spawn frequency. That's all we really need to do. Now, after that, the update method is going to start rolling every frame. So every frame, we want this timer to count down how much time. Now I remember saying this in, I think it might have been the first video. It was probably the first or the second video. I think it was the first video. The update method runs at different rates depending on your computer and how fast your processor is. So I can't go based on, okay, if it's been this many times of the update method being called, then it's been this amount of actual time in the real world. Unity has an easy way to fix that problem. It's a method called time.delta time. So here's what we want to do. We want to take our spawn timer. So spawn timer, remember I said you can say equals spawn timer, which is the current value, minus, and here's the special method, time.delta time. The time in seconds it took to complete the last frame. So this is how long it's been since our last call of the update method, time.delta time. Now remember, we can take this, and instead of doing it this way, we can do it shorthand, minus equals. That's the same as saying spawn timer equals spawn timer minus time.delta time. So it's going to count down. Basically, how long has it been since the last frame? It's going to decrement or lower the value of spawn timer. It's going to get closer and closer to 0. Now, so this is going to keep running and running and running. Now, it's going to reach a point where it's been 5 seconds. And we're going to have to check for that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say if spawn timer is less than or equals, we're not going to say equals 0 because chances are it's never going to equal 0 exactly. It's going to go from 0.01 to something negative. So we're going to say less than or equal to 0f. Now we have to use the f there too because we're comparing a float. If we compare a float, we have to compare it to a float value, which is why we have the f there. So in this if statement, this is where we're going to spawn our tank. So we're going to learn here soon how to spawn the tank. For right now, I'm just going to do a debug.log statement, and we're going to say spawn tank. Because right now, I just want to test this timer and see if this timer is working right. And then once we know that that's working right, we can go on to spawn the tank. So we're going to say spawn the tank, and then we need to reset the timer. So then spawn timer needs to be set back to spawn frequency up here so that we can get the value. How long are we going to wait until we spawn another tank? So spawn frequency is going to be set to spawn timer. Okay? Then the update will continue. Now the if statement's not going to be true until it's been 5 more seconds. Till then, it's just going to run this, take time off, take time off, take time off until we get down to this point. Now let's go ahead and run this and see how it works. Our circle has disappeared. Our code has compiled. We have our enemy manager here. As you can see, these values are filled in. These aren't being used in the code yet, but they will be. Right now, spawn frequency is being used. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get the console. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to go up here because I just want an easy view of the console. Waiting 5 seconds. There we go. Our tank just spawned. Tank spawned. Now in 5 more seconds, spawn another tank. Spawn another tank. Okay, we're looking good. We're looking good. So now let's get to the actual spawning of the tank. So, this is important. I can either put all the code right here that we're going to need for spawning the tank, which is not a bad idea, given the fact that this is all this is doing so far. In the future, it might do a lot more. For right now, let's go ahead and just put the code in here. And then I'm going to show you a better way to organize your code. But first, let's just go ahead and put the code in here. Now, we're not going to need that anymore. I'm going to comment it out. Just so we kind of know that this is for spawning the tank. Or I don't even need debug.log anymore. I can just say spawn the tank. So how are we going to spawn the tank? I mentioned earlier about creating a random value, right? So we need a random value between these two values, because we already know what the other axes are going to be, but we need a random between these two values. So here's what we're going to do, is we're going to say, well, we're going to create a float. Now, you don't put private or public in here because this is what's called a local variable. It's created inside the update method. So all we put here is the word float. We're creating a float because we're going to create a position where the tank will be spawned. Positions are vector 3's, which take 3 floats. So we're going to create a float z value, because that's what we're going to randomize. So float z value equals, now here's where it gets fun. We need to call this method mathf, a collection of common math functions. See here, it'll tell you what it is. Mathf, hit the tab key, make that happen. Mathf dot. Now, okay, so there's math functions in there, but there's also just math.random, I believe. How do we do random again? Oh, I forgot about this. Okay, random is actually its own class. So we're going to say random dot, now which one of these do we want to use? Range. If we do Random.Range, and then open the parentheses, now we have different options. We can do integers or floats. Float is what we want to do. Now minimum and maximum are going to be these two, right? Returns a random float number between minimum inclusive, meaning the value you put in there, it could actually include that, or the max inclusive, meaning it could include that. So if you put 1 to 10, it could include 1 or a 10. If it was exclusive, it could only include 2 to 9. Okay, so random range. Now, so our minimum value is going to be the negative one, right? So NZ spawn area. No. It seems like start would be okay. It might be better to flip these around. Let's go ahead and flip these around because I like the idea of using start first. Start Z spawn area. Not that we didn't have to flip it around, just a way of making it make a little bit more sense. And Z spawn area. Close parentheses. Hold on. Getting too excited. Close the parentheses, semicolon. So now we have our Z value. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually create the position. Okay, sorry, I had a hiccup in my recording software there. So now we're going to create the position, right? So position is a vector3 variable. So let's say vector3. I'm not going to capitalize it. Spawn position equals new. We're creating a new vector3, so we're going to initialize the value. New vector3. Brand new value. We're not getting it from somewhere else. We're just creating a new one. New vector3. Now we need our x, y, and z, right? X, y, and z. So what is our x? Let's go back to Unity and look and see where our tank was out here for our example. So we have x 492.9. Now we don't really want to use a weird value like that. Let's just go ahead and use 485. So let's say 485f. Now this is something we can make a variable with and change, and we'll probably do that later on. But for right now, we only want it to be spawning from a certain spot. So there's our x value. And what was the y? We want it to be actually on the ground, not hovering in the air. So 4.08, let's actually use 4.08. Now this here is going to take our random value, so let's use z value. This is what's going to change every time. So we have our spawn position. Now after we have our spawn position, we have everything that we need to actually spawn the tank. So let's go ahead and spawn the tank. Instantiate. What are we going to instantiate? Let's go to, this is the one that you want right here. Object. Okay, game object is a form of an object. It's just a more specific object. Everything is an object. Float is an object. An int is an object. Everything inherits from an object. That will make sense in the future, but you could. Now you can't instantiate a float. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But everything is of the type object, and this calls for the type of object. So, I mean, 500 times out of 10, you're going to be instantiating a game object. I always instantiate game objects. It just makes sense. I mean, you might be able to put a transform in there. It would probably work. To be honest, I haven't tested it. It makes sense to instantiate a game object. So, just being that showed up, I figured I should explain that a little bit. Now we want our tank to be instantiated. So, see, now there's different instantiate methods. There's what they call overloaded methods. So in this one it takes a transform parent. I guess that would make it already a child of something. But this is what we want. Now I don't have to go to that one. I can just type it in. But just for the sake of you seeing what's going on. Our position is going to be spawn position. I would stick to using this at first. You have your game object, then you have your position, and then you have your rotation. For rotation, we're going to do quaternion.identity, which means the original rotation given the object in the prefab where it's saved. We might need to change that later, because we could change it to look at something, look at the turret, you know, fun stuff like that. So this is all we need to do. It should spawn us a tank. Now the tank won't move yet. We haven't told the tanks to move, but it should spawn the tank. So let's get rid of this. We're not going to get rid of it. We're just going to make it invisible. Just want to see what's going to happen. So are we ready to roll? Are we ready to spawn tanks? We should see some tanks start to show up. There's one that showed up. Did it show up properly? No. No, it did not. It did not, but it did show up. There's another one that showed up. It did not show up properly though. So here's what we're going to have to do, is we're going to have to make it show up properly. Why is it showing up like that? What's its rotation 0, 0, 0? Now let's compare that against the rotation in the prefab. We might as well just, we don't need that open, we'll just go in here. Now this rotation was 89.98 and 180. So here's what we could do. Being that it's saved like that in the prefab, now keep in mind this is what is attached to this. It makes sense that instead of using quaternion.identity, we could use tank.transform.rotation. So we're going into the tank value that's saved here, the actual instance that we're copying, and we're going into its transform component and its rotation. Now what is saved there? This. So if we go into its transform and its rotation, we should get those values there, which we know looks right, because that's what we use for our example to figure out what looks right. Control S, I don't think I saved that. So I'm thinking this should work. I'm not going to say 100% yet that it will, but I think it will. Now before we do this, I don't want to wait 5 seconds every time. I don't think you guys do either. Let's go in here and change it to 2. I don't want it too crazy, but 2 is okay. So every 2 seconds we should get a tank. Now it looks like they are looking good. It looks like the tanks are actually, now that they're going to spawn on top of each other. We haven't told them not to do that, but they're going to be moving. And because they're going to be moving it, they won't spawn on top of each other because they'll wait. Now that we could check, I mean, there's a lot we could do, but we didn't tell it not to spawn on top of each other. Why would it? Why wouldn't it? So we have our tanks. Now, I want to make the tanks actually move. Okay, so let's create a script. Now let's think. Should it be called tank? Because I might want to apply it to something else. Why don't we just call it enemy? Not even enemy. Let's just call it vehicle. Because I'm thinking ahead. I'm thinking, what if in the future we have our own vehicles that we can send their way? So I try to keep this generic, because then we could use the same script for multiple things. Variables allow you to do that. You can just change the variable. Say, is this an enemy tank or is this a friendly tank? So we have our vehicle tank. All we're going to do right now is make it move forward. Okay, it's going to have speed, so public float speed. We'll go ahead and put a default value in here. Let's go ahead and let's just throw 17. Why not? Now, how do we make it move forward? We haven't actually talked about how to do that. It's going to move a certain amount. Okay, so this speed, that's going to be how many units per second it travels, right? So how do we do that? Well, it's going to have to move a little bit every frame. So if we go into our update method, every update, it's going to move forward. Now, which of those vector3 methods do we use? Remember, there's vector3.forward, vector3.up, and vector3.right. So if we look at our tank, this is our example here. If we look at moving forward, which is this way, that's along the x-axis. So actually what's happening is the x is becoming more, it's shrinking. So in order to move that way, we would actually have to do vector3.right, because vector3.right references the x. Now you could do forward if they were facing a different way. Or there's a way to do it where it's actually relative to the rotation, I believe. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So what we can do here is go Transform.Translate. This is a method that moves the transform in the direction and distance of the translation. We can do translate. We're going to open our parentheses. Now this has a space relative to, and that will allow us to make it relative to the object. Now provided it's rotated right, when they modeled this and they set it up on the axis there, provided it's rotated correctly, it should work when we do forward relative. Now if we go up here and make that local, over here is still going to be world coordinates, so it's still hard to tell. See how it changes there? The blue goes up there, where the colors are is which axis is which. So right now, that's the z-axis. Then if we go here, that I guess becomes the z-axis. See, they're changing colors on me, so to be honest, I'm not sure until I test it. I'm more of a coder. I want to test it and see what's going to happen. So why don't we try this? Why don't we do translate? Now, what does it want? It wants a translation. Okay, so we want to do vector3.forward. Remember, that's short for this. It's the same as if we use the new. It said new vector3 and put that in. Vector3.forward. Now we have to multiply this by time.delta time. Why are we doing that? Because we want it to do this many units per second. This translates the amount of frames being called into actual real-time seconds, time.delta time. So we're doing that. Now if we go into our next argument here, we're going to do space, type the word space, space.self, which means it's going to be relative to itself and not to the world. Go ahead and do that. That should work just fine. I think the tank is going to move incredibly slow, and we're probably going to have to speed it up, but that's okay for starters. Let's go ahead and just get rid of that. Now the tank here, now here's another way. I don't think we need this animator. We're moving it ourselves. We don't need this animator component. The reason it's there is because when they modeled it and then they imported it to create the package that we downloaded from the asset store, a lot of times they import already with those. Whether they're using it or not, we're learning how to make them move by ourselves. So that's why I'm just going to go ahead and remove that component, and then I'm going to add this vehicle script right here. I'm going to make this faster. I think 30 might be better. I want to know right away what's going to happen. Okay, let's save our project and let's get going and see what happens. So here's a tank. Is it moving? It's moving up. Good news, it is moving. The bad news is it's moving up. Why the heck is it moving up? That means that when they modeled this, they made the forward position facing up, which is fine. I'm sure they had their reasons for that, but we're going to have to adjust. So if forward is actually up, what if we do, let's just go through them. Let's just try them. There's multiple ways to do this. You could actually make the tank a child of another object and rotate it properly and so on and so forth. But for the sake of just making it work for now, being that it's only moving in one direction. That's why it doesn't really matter. Now they're moving correctly. Okay. Now the thing that concerns me is the fact that I used right. It wasn't negative or anything. I just used right, and it's moving forward. Why does that concern me? Because I feel like it's just weird. Really, it's the only reason. But we know, I think if we look at it like this, now it's moving right? It's just one of those things where, because they modeled it a certain way, it doesn't know which way it's supposed to go. We look at it and see it's a tank, the turret's facing that way, but it doesn't know, It doesn't know. So when you're dealing with models, it's up to the modeler to model it a certain way. Now that doesn't mean that they modeled it wrong, because there's ways to manipulate it in Unity. And maybe for whatever reason that was the easiest. I'm not a modeler. I don't know. I'm not going to judge. Let's make them move faster. Faster is good, because that way they won't spawn inside of each other. I feel like it's not moving faster. It doesn't seem like it's moving faster at all. I don't understand it. Oh, now I understand it. We haven't used our speed variable down here. We need to multiply this by speed. That's what's going on here. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and just restart this. There's a compiler error. Speed does not exist in the current context. And that is because it's capitalized. Variable names are case sensitive. It's very important that you get the case correct. Otherwise it will not know what you're talking about. Now that we have that, it's probably going to go way fast. Because I kept speeding it up. Okay, that's too fast. That kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. It's so fast. Let's go down to 40. Or even 35. We don't want the game to be too hard right off the bat, Who's going to play a game that's so hard it's impossible? Here come the tanks. So figure you're over here at your turret, right? Here they come. That's even too fast, I think. Tanks don't go that fast. Come on. Get real. Let's go down to 15. Here they come. Here comes the tanks. Now, if you notice in our game view, we can't actually manipulate the camera. We can rotate this, and we can fire, but this is about all we can see. Nothing's going to happen if it hits the tanks yet. That's another video now. Make something happen when it hits the tanks. Also, when the tanks get over here, they're going to just keep going. They're going to, So there's a lot we need to add to this, but at least now we have the tanks moving. I'm going to go ahead and over here what we'll do is in the game view we'll make it more of a view like this where you can rotate and see what's going on around you. Like, oh, maybe the camera can just follow this turret here. In fact, why don't we do that real quick? Why don't we close out the tutorial by doing that? Let's just make the camera follow the turret. So in the turret we have our pylon, right? And that's what we're rotating. So if we take the main camera, make it a child of the pylon, then we can lift this camera up. See how because this is the game view, this is what we're actually going to see. Lift it up. We're going to rotate it. Hold on. We're going to just rotate over here. Oh, that's position. That's position. We need to rotate on the Y. Okay? So I think 180 is actually what we need. Now if we get close here and focus, we'll be able to see. Maybe it's because it's all white that we can't actually see it. But if we move it back here, focus. We should be able to see turret. Okay, now I can see it. It's over here. It's the rotation. The rotation is off. Let's rotate it this way. So it looks like 90 is what we actually want. This up, and I'm sure you guys are laughing at me because you already know how to do this stuff. I mean, you're ready to code. You already know how to manipulate this kind of thing. So let's go up here. Let's rotate it down a little bit. Now we'll make in the code later, actually, we'll be able to manipulate the camera. Right now, while we do that, maybe even lift it up a little bit more. Okay. Control S, save the scene. Now if we rotate it, there we go. Now if we hit F, I mean we can, these are very sad projectiles, right? Got a lot of them, but they're very sad. Anyways, now I can look back at the base and protect myself from the base. Not protect the base, not protect myself from the base. I want to protect the base. I'm getting tired of making too many videos in one day. That's okay. So you can see how this is coming together though, right? I mean, we got tanks coming. Now what would happen if a tank came directly at me? I mean, eventually that would happen. It would go right through me. That's what would happen. But we could add a special event for that. Something to keep in mind. There's a lot of things we could do. There's a lot, definitely a lot that we can do. So the next tutorial is going to be about actually hitting the tank, taking the tank out with the bullet. I think that'll be a fun next way to go. Also, I might shorten the range up. I mean, you're not going to hit it. You could hit a tank way out there, but I might make them not have to come so far before they get to us. Or maybe not, you know? Maybe this is okay. I mean, I might be thinking about it too hard. Might be thinking about it too hard. You know, I might just need to calm down a little bit. How many tanks do we want? I mean, maybe there's not enough tanks, right? Maybe we need a lot more. Look at all those. Now what are we going to do? Look at all these tanks. That's just ridiculous. Okay, I need to stop. I need to stop. I appreciate you watching this tutorial. I hope you had fun, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. And thank you guys, and have a good night. And we will get on it in the next tutorial to actually shooting down the tanks.